Well, is it time to hoist the anchor, baby? Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Whittle here with Steve Green and Scott Ott. And breaking news that I heard on the way into the taping today, courtesy of Dr. Steve Turley, who's got a great channel and gets in depth on a lot of the details that I don't fully understand, but that never stops me from giving an authoritarian or authoritative position on all of them. Here's the news that I heard coming in today. The Ninth Circuit Court, or as Dr. Turley and others refer to it as the Ninth Circus Court, has just issued a remarkable decision. And I'm going to outline the basics of the decision because I'm not so much interested in the legality of what I'm about to talk about. I kind of want to more talk about the morality of it. As I understand it, the extremely liberal court case has ruled on a situation where there was a man who was the son of a Nicaraguan diplomat to the United States. He was granted US citizenship because he was born in the United States. He was issued 7 passports over the course of his life, so he's been here for quite a long time. And when he went to reapply for his latest passport, they had checked and found out that he is not a US citizen. And what the court ruled was that he was not a US citizen. There's a difference between an attaché and a consul. And apparently an attaché is not subject to the political jurisdiction of the United States of America. They have to follow our laws. They have to follow the territorial jurisdiction. But the attaché is under the political jurisdiction of the country from which he came from, which in this case I believe was Nicaragua, which means that his children are not under the legal jurisdiction of the United States, which means that they are not U.S. citizens. So this particular ruling is pretty narrow case here. But what Dr. Turley was saying was that this could be an enormously powerful legal precedent for the Trump administration, who is trying to get rid of the idea of anchor babies. So let me just read the first section of the 14th Amendment. It says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Now, the left has been using this to say, as they usually do with things like the Commerce Clause and so on, let's leave out this, let's put a period after, here instead of a comma. What they read is that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. But that's not what the 14th Amendment says. Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So the way this impacts the entire anchor babies situation is, does the 14th Amendment provides that citizenship with a caveat being subject to the jurisdiction thereof. This allows the Trump administration to make the case that if somebody just comes in and plays tag with America, right? They needless to say, there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions perhaps, of foreign nationals that have come to the United States specifically to have a child. So that child gets U.S. citizenship, and then they work from there. This is the whole anchor babies theory. So Steve, I'm actually more interested in the moral issue here. Now, before anybody gets all lathered up, I am a firm believer in the rule of law, and I think that our immigration policy has been weaponized to the enormous detriment of the United States and so on.
Yes.
And I think, furthermore, that this will be a useful tool in denying citizenship to people who had never desired to become U.S. citizens, only to tag base so they can get the benefits of U.S. citizenship. However, in this particular case, the man sued and went all the way up to the Ninth Circuit, and he lost the case. I have some sympathy for somebody who has been told from birth that he's a U.S. citizen, has been issued multiple passports as a U.S. citizen, has lived, apparently, my understanding, lived in the country the entire time. So what do we do morally about this issue of changing the status of people who were born in the United States, even if that status change conforms to the actual law as written?
Yeah. Before I get into that, I just want to mention that I've long been an advocate of taking that subject to the jurisdiction thereof clause seriously, and that eliminates anchor babies. And it's nice to see a court, any court, stand up for that, even if this is a fairly narrow decision regarding an embassy attaché. But that's ground laid. We can work from there. But you're talking about the broader issue of what do you do with a couple of illegal aliens who came to this country, let's just say looking for work. They found it. They also had a baby that may have factored into their calculations, may not have, but they've been in the country for 22 years. The baby is now 21 years old, 22 years old, has been raised in this country, speaks the language, went to our school, watches our movies and TV shows, listens to our music. I'm going to say that the law as we understood it prior to this decision is probably has to apply. I cannot understand. I mean, I do understand, but I have trouble approving of the rationale that says that this kid, who no fault of his own, her own, did not enter this country legally in his mother's belly, but has been raised and effectively is an American citizen. How do you take that away? Where do you send them to? That's a troubling issue, and I can definitely see both sides of it. And in terms of caseload, should this Ninth Court of Appeals decision go wide with the Supreme Court, there's going to be a huge can of worms. There are going to be huge numbers of lawsuits of people who don't know any other country, who don't know any other culture, saying, "Hey, I've been American all my life. Where are you trying to send me?" And that's the kind of person we do want here. The person who has been born and raised American and has always been a part of their whole life has been a part of the fabric of this country. However, going forward, should this case law go wide, going forward, I think it changes the rules entirely. In the future, again, should the Supreme Court decide this applies nationwide and to anchor babies, in the future, then yes, the law has to apply the way it should have applied to begin with. And that is, if you came over here and you had your baby, there's no anchor. We've cut that chain.
Well, I want to be crystal clear on this. I am not talking about people who have snuck into the country illegally who are illegal aliens. Yeah. Those people need to be deported.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. So just so there's no conclusion, just so there's no conclusion about, like ignoring the 30 million illegal immigrants or whatever the number is here and not dealing with that problem. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about people who have been given US citizenship. So for example, if a family of 6 comes here illegally, let's say, right? And they have a 7th child, and the 7th child is born in the United States, the interpretation that has existed of the 14th Amendment, which was an incorrect interpretation of it,
yes,
nevertheless granted that person U.S. citizenship. So now you're talking about revoking that citizenship. That's the subset of illegal immigration that I'm talking about here.
Okay,
right?
just that very narrow area.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about, and that's
you're not talking
that's
about
who
the
you
kid
answered
who was born
for.
here 20 years ago, and was going to a college, speaking English yeah.
So
okay.
let me go on to you, Scott. I have some personal family, very personal family with this, and you might be thinking about my immigrant wife who's now a U.S. citizen, but I'm not. I'm talking about my brother and sister. So I was born in New York City. New York City. Yes, I was born in Manhattan. My brother Steve, who's a year younger than me, was born in Manhattan. Then there was a period of 4 or 5 years when we moved to Bermuda, and my brother Evan and my sister Melanie were born in Bermuda. But my father, I don't remember exactly how this went, but my father ensured that they would be U.S. citizens because he was a U.S. citizen. And if that hadn't been cleared with the embassy, he would have had to fly my mom back to America to give birth in America so that there'd be no question about it. My dad is obviously a U.S. citizen and I was, and so on. So my brothers, I'm taking the other side of the argument here. My brother and sister were born in a foreign country, but my father's political allegiance was to the United States. And so even though they were born in Bermuda, they were granted U.S. citizenship because of the father's political affiliation. This is the crux of how anchor babies would be essentially disqualified by saying that, yes, this child was born in the United States, but has no political, but the parents, rather, because a child is a child, the parents have no political, the United States has no political jurisdiction over the parents. That's, if I understand it correctly, the crux of the issue.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things here on the moral level, and one of those is, what do we do to someone who is now about to suffer because we've been wrong for years?
Yeah.
And how do you handle the person who theoretically, as they like to say, has done everything right, wasn't trying to evade the law, was, applying for passports, received passports, everything's going fine, and then we wake up one day and realize that we have been reading the 14th Amendment as if the word therefore was in that first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and therefore subject to the jurisdiction thereof. But it doesn't say and therefore. Mm-hmm. It just says and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. So we find out we're wrong. Do we owe something to the person who now, because of our lately realized mistake, is here illegally? And that's a tough question. And then when does that debt, that public obligation, end? And with whom does it end? Can we say to this person, look, I'm sorry, you're going to have to go back to Nicaragua? Can we say to this person, look, no fault of your own, we made the mistake, our bad, just carry on. We're going to pretend nothing ever happened. Or do we say to this person, look, we've realized our mistake and we want to give you an opportunity to become legit. And so here is a pathway of some sort for you to establish your bona fides as a citizen of the United States. There is law, and then there is de facto law. There is actual written law that people are supposed to obey, but then there are many things in our lives that we might want to call de facto law, which is essentially people expect us to live by them, even though they might not be written. There's actually a book by a liberal scholar called America's Unwritten Constitution, and he tries to make this argument that there are things that are not contained in the text of the Constitution, nevertheless, should be considered as if they were, because that's how we live. I don't think there's an easy answer to this.
It really isn't.
I don't think you can just brush it off and say, sorry, we made a mistake. Let's just pretend nothing ever happened. You're still going to, for the rest of your life, you're going to pretend you're a citizen of the United States, even though now, under the law, we understand that you aren't and you never were. I don't know how you cut that knot.
Yeah. So again, I want to be really clear about this. People who sneak over the border, and especially these military-age males, and they just sneak over the border and they're hiding underground. See you later. Bye-bye. The 14th Amendment, if my understanding is correct, was really essentially just dealing with one issue specifically, and that was what are the status of slaves once the Civil War had ended.
Yeah, that's why it was written, yeah.
The 13th Amendment freed the slaves, but then you've got people 8 million people at the time, freed slaves living in America who had essentially no government affiliation. They didn't belong to any country.
No legal status.
None. They had no passports. They had nothing. So the 14th Amendment was ratified in order to grant citizenship to former slaves living in the United States, and that was the purpose, and I think that was the only way to handle that issue. I think if you had said to any of the people that had written that amendment that people would be able to literally cross the line, put their toe in there, have a baby, and automatically become American citizens, I think they would have changed the wording of this. Well, as it turns out, they did take care of that. It's just that we've spent 50 years of pretending that little clause, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, doesn't exist. A good way to think about this is a tourist, right? If a family comes to visit the United States on a tourist visa, and they're in New York and they've been here for a couple of weeks, and the wife is expecting a baby in 3 weeks, and she's going to be back in London when that happens, but the baby is born prematurely, and the baby is born in the hospital in the United States. According to the 14th Amendment as written, that child is not a citizen of the United States. The political jurisdiction of the parents is not the United States. It's Great Britain in that particular case. That's very clear to understand. I don't think anybody would make the case that a family that is in the United States for tourism has a premature birth, then that baby is...
And they're here legally.
Yes, exactly.
They have a visa.
Exactly. So Scott said there's law and then there's written law, and above that is justice. And I'm a huge believer in the rule of law, and I understand that the left has misused the system by depending on people's decency, compassion, and kindness to allow this invasion to continue. And I'm not buying the kindness argument. I'm buying the justice argument. I think the only solution to this, well, first of all, the first solution is, as Steve said, if your boat is taken on water, the first thing you do is you stop the leaks, right? That's the first thing you do. With the border, we have secured the border. There are essentially no illegal border crossings for the last several months since Donald Trump took office. So the problem's not getting worse. So going forward, if there is a Supreme Court ruling on this, the amendment as written, not as determined by progressives, will apply, and that will take care of the plugged leaks. Now, what do you do with the water that you've already shipped? I have always thought that the solution to this problem, the most compassionate, legal, sensible course of action in this relatively small section of cases, is to offer that person a place in the back of the line to actual U.S. citizenship and allow them to continue living the way they've been living because they were essentially lied to by a previous version of the U.S. government that told them the untruth that if all you have to do is just get here to America, you're a U.S. citizen. That wasn't them talking. That was us talking. That was our government making that position. And that, to me, seems to be the most decent, fair, and moral thing to do. Back of the line, not the front of the line, back of the line. That's about a 6-7 year process. And I know this from personal experience.
With continued residency.
With continued residency, yes. And then they would have to go through all of the things that my wife had to go to become a U.S. citizen. I can't think of any solution other than that that's fair. I don't want to be a country that is so soft-headed that we allow ourselves to be ruined because of a sense of guilt for something that we don't earn. I don't want to be so hard-headed that we commit acts that are unjust to people who have essentially been following the rules. Again, I'm making this particular case for citizenship. And to me, this seems like the best balance. We'd love to hear what you think is the best balance, because this is not an easy issue. We want to be right. We want to be fair. We want to protect America, but we want to do the right thing as well as the smart thing. And so we'd love to read your comments on this one, because this one is a difficult issue. And if it stops the leaks going forward, then that's better than the backward decisions that we've been making for the last 50 or 60 years. For Steve Green and Scott Ott, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time here on Right Angle.